Hello and welcome back to another motion episode of Apple a Day. Now today is a real throwback. We're going to go and recreate the opening title sequence for 1978's BuckRogers. This is made up of several individual segments, and we'll be saving those out as templates which can be used in Final Cut Pro to assemble the complete title sequence. So here's what we're going to recreate. This is the original opening from the show. Unfortunately, it's a little less dramatic without the music, but I didn't want to get a copyright slam. So the beginning has 4 different split screen layouts, and we'll be making 4 different templates for these. That fades into this gold wispy effect, which can be made using one of the built-in particle emitters. And this is where it gets interesting, these moving rings. Now, in this freeze frame, you can see that the effect is made up of a series of rings. This part where that golden effect shows through is transparent, and the rings containing the videos are masks. Note that they also have a black border. In the last segment, after the rings are gone, this is just a background video, with the video playing masked to a circle on top of the golden effect, which is also masked by another circle. So I've done a lot of the prep work for you and created all of the necessary graphic elements using Affinity Designer. And these have been exported as PSD and PNG files, which can easily be imported into Apple Motion. I've also supplied sample video files which you can use to place into the final sequence. In the description, I've supplied a DropBox link containing all of the assets. Please go ahead and download those assets now, as you'll need them to work on this project. Now that you've got the files, let's start with the first split screen segment. Create a blank HD project that's 5 seconds long and drag in the slide1.psd file into the Layers tab. Now hold the mouse button down until the menu appears and then select Import All Layers. Motion is going to place these layers inside of a group, so let's move the Slide 1 group to the root level and then delete the remaining empty group. So let me explain what we're working with. You can see that there are 6 layers. I'm going to turn them all off for now. Also, there's a minor glitch with the name of the last layer from the PSD file. The layer name was S1-DropZone3, but it comes up as background. So I'll just rename that now. By the way, the S1 stands for Slide 1. So the drop zones are the video drop zones, which are full 16:9 aspect ratio. They're labeled 1, 2, and 3. And if you're brand new to Motion, a drop zone is just a placeholder for video. When this is saved as a template for Final Cut Pro, you'll be able to drop a video clip into the drop zone placeholder. The masks are the corresponding masks for each drop zone. These represent the visible area for the drop zones, and you can see that there are 3 vertical strips for the split screen effect. So let's get it set up. First, only enable the drop zone 1 layer and turn all the others off. Select the drop zone 1 layer, and in the inspector, on the Image tab, change the type to drop zone. If you click on the drop-down arrow for the source media, you'll see that it's already been published automatically. Now, being published means that it will be available in Final Cut Pro when we save this as a generator template. We also want to make sure to publish the pan and scale parameters as well. So let's do that now. Click on the drop-down arrow for pan and select Publish, and then do the same for scale. Notice that when we changed it to a drop zone, Motion changed the layer name to drop zone. Let's rename it to drop zone 1. Now we need to make sure drop zone 1 is masked, so when video plays in this drop zone, we only see it as a vertical strip. So right-click on drop zone 1 and select Add Image Mask. Then select the Mask 1 layer and drag it onto the mask source. Okay, that's done, so now let's repeat the same for drop zone 2. Select it, and then under the Image tab, change the type to drop zone. This time it auto-renamed to drop zone 2, so we don't have to change it. Publish the pan and scale parameters. Then right-click on the drop zone and add an image mask. And drag in mask 2 to the mask source. And the same for drop zone 3. I'll turn on that layer and you can see how the split screen effect will look. That's it. That's all we need to do for this template. So let's save this as a generator and make it available in Final Cut Pro. Under the File menu, choose Publish Template. Check the option to publish as Final Cut Generator. Add a new category and call it BuckRogers. And name this template Slide 1. Okay, so let's go check this out in Final Cut Pro to make sure it worked. I've already got a timeline open. I'll click on the Titles and Generators icon and go down to Generators. And here we have our BuckRogers category. And in there is Slide 1. So I'm going to drag that onto my timeline. Now I'll hide the generators and select the template. And you can see on the right the published parameters. I've supplied some sample videos that you can use. Drag the sample video folder onto the Final Cut project now. This is going to bring in all the videos that we'll be using later in this tutorial, but for now we're only interested in Slide 1-Drop Zone 1, 2, and 3. So then with the template in the timeline selected, drag each video into the corresponding drop zone. 1, 2, and then 3. When that's done, you can adjust the panning to better position the videos. In the examples I provided, I just have to adjust the X value. And notice that when the playhead reaches the last frame, Final Cut will freeze that frame and hold it for as long as the template is visible. I'm going to want to match the template length with the video. So when the video ends, I'll just use the left and right arrow keys on the keyboard to precisely move the playhead to the last frame and then drag the right edge of the clip and snap it to the playhead. If snapping is turned off, just press the N key to turn it back on. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's jump back to Motion and do the same for the second slide. Make a new project. Drag in slide2.psd. And again, keep the mouse button held down until the menu appears and select Import All Layers. Move it out of the group to the root level and delete the empty group. Let's fix the name for that background layer and we'll rename it to S2-Drop Zone 3. Then select Drop Zone 1 and change the type to a drop zone. Publish the parameters for pan and scale. Then rename it to Drop Zone 1. Create the image mask. Drag in the mask 1 layer onto the mask source, and do the same for Drop Zone 2 and 3. Before saving, make sure that the masks are off and all the drop zones are turned on. Under the File menu, choose Publish Template. Check the option to publish as Final Cut Generator. Select BuckRogers for the category, and name this template Slide 2. I have also supplied the PSD files for slides 3 and 4, and the creation of these is exactly the same as what we just did, so you should be able to follow the video again and do the same for the remaining 2 slides. I'm just going to fast forward through the creation of those 2 slides. Moving over to Final Cut Pro, you should have 4 generators in the BuckRogers category named Slide 1 through Slide 4. If I drag each one of these templates to the timeline, you'll see the different split screen layouts for each slide. Okay, so that wasn't too hard. Let's go back to Motion and dive into the rings animation. So for this, I'm going to create a new 50-second project. And I'm going to drag in the ring.psd file onto the Layers tab. And once again, hold it for a second until the menu appears and then select Import All Layers. This will create a new group. Let's rename it to Rings. Since we're going to need 7 of these rings, let's rename the ring group to Ring 1. Okay, so inside the Ring 1 group, you can see it's made up of 2 layers. This border layer is just these black circles which will border the video playing within the drop zone. And this mask layer will mask the video to play only within this white ring area. Now we don't have a drop zone layer yet, and I'll explain the reasons why momentarily. So next we want to have these rings start small and grow out beyond the edges of the screen. So select ring 1 and then go to the inspector and then to properties and set the scale to 1%. In the timeline, this ring 1 layer currently plays the full length of the 50-second timeline. We certainly don't need that. Each ring segment should be roughly 7 seconds long, but to be precise, I've matched this to the original sequence and it's 7 seconds and 5 frames. So move the playhead to 7 seconds and 5 frames in the timeline. Then press the O key to set the out point for this ring 1 group. With ring 1 still selected, let's add a grow shrink behavior to the group. So go to the behavior menu and then to basic motion and select grow shrink. With increment at natural scale, change the scale to value to 22,850, 22850. Now if you play this back, the ring should go completely off screen by the last frame. Okay, good. So next we want to fade these in. So again, with ring 1 selected, go back up to behaviors, then to basic motion and select fade in, fade out. Leave the fade in time at 20 and set the fade out time to 0. Playing this back, the ring fades in nicely. Okay, so now we need to make copies of this ring. There are 7 in the sequence. With ring 1 selected, right-click on it in the Layers tab and choose Duplicate, or you can press Command D. Rename this to Ring 2. Now we need to space these ring groups out in the timeline. I've already determined that the separation in time needs to be 2 seconds and 5 frames. So in your timeline, select Ring 2 and press +2:05. And that will move this forward in the timeline by 2 seconds and 5 frames. When you play this back, you can see that it appears ring 1 and ring 2 are connected. That's pretty seamless. Okay, so now let's repeat this process. Select ring 2, duplicate it, rename to ring 3, make sure it's selected in the timeline, and type +2:05, and then do this again by duplicating ring 3, renaming it to ring 4, and so on for ring 5, 6, and 7. So when that's finished, and when we play this back, we get a seemingly endless series of rings coming towards the camera, even though they're just growing larger. And also they're synchronized, so it appears like one continuous movement. Alright, so next we need to create the drop zones. So you might be wondering why we didn't just include the drop zone layer in the ring.psd file. Well, I actually did that originally and realized that when I placed a video in the drop zone, the video scaled up with the ring group. So that wouldn't work. The rings need to scale, but the videos must play at a constant size. Only the masks for the videos should scale as well as the black border. So move the playhead to the very beginning and drag in the ring.dropzones.psd file onto the Layers tab. Once again, hold for a moment and select Import All Layers. Now move the ring drop zones group out to the root layer and then delete the blank group. Also make sure to move the ring drop zones group down to the bottom so it's underneath the rings group. Again, Apple Motion renamed the last layer in this drop zones group to background. It should be called ring drop zone 1, so I'll just rename that now. And just like we did with the rings group, move the playhead to 7 seconds and 5 frames, and with the ring drop zones group selected, press the O key on the keyboard to mark the out point. Rather than duplicating the drop zones, instead I made a numbered layer for each one. That way it's easy to tell which ring you're looking at when it's in Final Cut Pro. This does make a little bit more work for us though, but it's much less confusing when working with the template later on. So we need to move these in the timeline by 2 seconds and 5 frames, just like we did with each individual ring. So in the timeline, select Drop Zone 2 and then hold the Command key and select each drop zone up to Drop Zone 7. Or you could just click and drag with your mouse to select them all. So once you have drop zones 2 through 7 selected, we're going to move them ahead in the timeline by 2 seconds and 5 frames. So press the plus sign, the number 2, semicolon, and 05, and then press return, and all of those groups will move ahead in the timeline. Now hold the Command key and click on drop zone 2 to deselect it. This should leave the remaining drop zones selected, and again, press plus 2, semicolon, 05 to move them ahead in the timeline. Then deselect drop zone 3 and repeat the process. Press plus 2, semicolon, 05 one more time, and repeat this again, deselecting one drop zone after another until all of them have been moved, and you should see the stair-step pattern when you're done. Now, playing this back won't do much since the drop zones are static and they're filling the screen. They have not yet been masked. So next, we need to apply the masks from the ring layers to these drop zones. First, let's make sure each ring layer is visible in the Layers panel. Then select the ring drop zone 1, right-click and choose Add Image Mask. Scroll up to ring 1 and drag the mask layer from that ring 1 group onto the mask source. I'm just going to turn on all of these drop zone layers. If you position your playhead so only ring 1 is visible, you can see that the mask worked. Okay, so select drop zone 2 and then right-click and again press Add Image Mask. Scroll to ring 2, drag the mask layer onto the mask source, and repeat this process all the way up to drop zone 7. Side note, the name of the mask layer was altered with each copy of the ring group. Go by the name of the ring group and not the name of the mask. Maybe we should have taken the time to rename the contents of each group as we duplicated them, but I thought that was an unnecessary step. Okay, so when that's done, we have to convert these drop zone layers to actual drop zones. I'm just going to close this rings group. I'll select drop zone 1, go to the Image tab, change the type to drop zone. Motion will change the name of the layer to drop zone, so I'm going to change it back to drop zone 1. And like we did with the slides, we need to publish the pan and scale properties. So click on the drop-down arrow for pan and choose Publish, and do the same for scale. Now select drop zone 2 and do the same thing. Change the type to drop zone and publish the pan and scale properties. Note that the name should stay at drop zone 2, you shouldn't have to rename it. Okay, so now repeat this process for drop zones 3 through 7. And now when that's all done, let's play this back and see how it looks. Pretty good, except we need to fade in the drop zones just like we did for the rings. We don't want them popping in. So with drop zone 1 selected, go up to Behaviors, then to Basic Motion and select Fade In, Fade Out. Leave the fade in time at 20 and set the fade out time to 0. Now select the fade in, fade out behavior. You should see a white border around it like this. Then press Command C to copy this behavior, or right-click and select Copy. Then select drop zone 2 and either press Command V to paste in the behavior, or right-click and select Paste. The fade in, fade out behavior should then appear for this drop zone. If the copy and paste didn't work, go back to drop zone 1, reselect the fade in, fade out behavior, and try copying and pasting again. It seems like there's a glitch in Motion that if you add a new behavior, you're not able to copy it yet until you leave that layer and then come back. So now do the same thing for the remaining drop zones. You shouldn't have to copy the behavior again because it's already been copied to the clipboard. So now select each drop zone and press Command V, or right-click and select Paste. So when that's done, let's play this back to see how it looks. You should see each drop zone appear and fade in, and you'll see the drop zone numbers increase from 1 to 7. Okay, so that looks pretty good, but we do need to add one more drop zone to play the video, which is revealed after the last ring goes off screen. That's this area right here. So this new drop zone we're about to add needs to start at 13 seconds and 20 frames in the timeline. So position your playhead to 1320, and then when we drag in the graphics, they'll already be at the proper point in the timeline. So go ahead and drag in Ring Drop Zone 8 Mask.psd to the Layers tab. And again, hold the mouse down until the menu appears and select Import All Layers. Then rename the group that it's in to Drop Zone 8. And then make sure to move this Drop Zone 8 group to the very bottom underneath the Ring Drop Zones group. Then drag in the Ring Drop Zone.png file to be inside this Drop Zone 8 group. Position it so it's underneath the ring Drop Zone 8 mask group. So inside this mask group, we have this white circle, which is the mask, and we also have a black border. So the mask and the border need to be a growing circle moving at the same rate as the rings. So first, let's shrink it down. So with the ring Drop Zone 8 mask group selected, go to the properties and change the scale. This time we need to make it smaller than 1%. It needs to be at 0.3%. Now we need to add in the animation. Rather than recreating the behaviors, let's just copy them. So I'm going to go up to the rings group, open it up, and select the ring 1 group, and then go to the behaviors tab. I'm going to select the fade in, fade out behavior. Then holding the command key, I'm going to click on the grow shrink behavior, and this will select them both. Then press Command C to copy them, or right click and select copy. Now go back and select the ring Drop Zone 8 mask group, and press Command V to paste in the behaviors. Quickly confirm that they were copied by viewing the Behaviors tab. So next, we need to add this growing mask to the Drop Zone layer. So right-click on the ring Drop Zone 8 layer and select Add Image Mask. Then drag in this mask layer. I'll play this back to see how it looks. Drop Zone 8 is revealed at the very end. Looks really good. The last thing we need to do here is to convert the Drop Zone 8 layer to be an actual drop zone. Select that layer and change the type to Drop Zone. And then, just like before, we're going to publish the pan and scale properties. One other thing we still have to do is limit the length of the mask, because as you can see, when the playhead goes beyond the end of the grow shrink behavior, the size of the mask reverts to its original size. So let's just turn the mask off before that happens. Move the playhead to 20 seconds and 25 frames, and select the mask in the timeline. If you don't see the mask, select Drop Zone 8 in the timeline, and then click on the disclosure triangle to see the mask layer. Select the mask and type the letter O to mark the mask out point. Now the drop zone is still fully visible. Okay, so now we need to make the cool golden animation that appears in these black rings. We're going to use some of the existing particle emitter templates already in motion. Make sure that your playhead is at the beginning, and now create a new group by right-clicking in the Layers tab and select New Group. Name this new group Gold Ring Effect. And then move the group to the bottom of the Layers panel. Now create another group and name it Effect 1. And then a third group and name it Effect 2. Drag Effect 1 and Effect 2 into the Gold Ring Effect group. We made these two subgroups because we're going to use 2 copies of a particle emitter to create the effect we need. And we made these 2 groups to house the emitters. Now go to the Library tab and select Particle Emitters. Find the Aurora emitter and drag it into the Effect 1 group. Then select the Effect 1 group and go to the inspector and set the position to 0x and -70y. Then set the scale to 350%, and lastly, set the opacity to 30%. Note that the position of the parent group, the Gold Ring Effect group, should be 0 and 0. Okay, so next, go back to the library and drag another copy of the Aurora particle emitter into the Effect 2 group. Select the Effect 2 group, then go to the inspector, set the rotation to 90, then open up the scale property so we can see X, Y, and Z separately. Set the X scale to 300, and the Y scale to 600, and the Z scale also to 600. Then set the opacity to 5%. Okay, so now select the Gold Ring Effect group and go up to Filters, go down to Color, and then choose Colorize. Then in the Colorize filter under the inspector, select the Remap Black color. Then in the color palette which appears, switch over to RGB mode if you're not already there, and then type in these values as the RGB values. Red should be 130, green 75, and blue 40. Then select the remap white color and enter these RGB values. Red, 230, green, 170, and blue, 50. Okay, we're almost done. Now select the gold ring effect group, and we're going to lower the opacity some more because this is still a bit too bright. Change the opacity of this entire group to 50%. Now move the playhead to 23 seconds, and with the gold ring effect group selected, press the O key to mark the out point for this group. So now we need to leave some room at the beginning with only the gold effect on the screen before the rings start to appear. So to make this easier, we're going to group together all of the ring groups now. So select Rings, Ring Drop Zones, and Drop Zone 8. Then right-click and select Group. Name this new group to Final Ring Effect. Then select it in the timeline and press +3 ;15 to move it ahead 3 seconds and 15 frames in the timeline. All right, so now let's play this whole thing back and see how it turned out. So far so good. The gold ring effect looks good. The rings are all uniformly spaced and moving in one continuous motion. I'm pretty happy with that. Oops, I think I made a mistake and cut the gold ring effect too early. This black area should also be showing the gold ring effect. I'm just going to move this playhead a bit further to 24 seconds and select the gold ring effect group and type O on the keyboard, and that should fix it. I'll just play the ending again to make sure it's good. Okay, problem solved. So the last thing we need to do in this template is to add the BuckRogers character and have him slowly spin and shrink into the rings as the rings come forward. I've supplied a PNG for that, so with the playhead at the very beginning, drag the BuckRogers guide.png onto the Layers tab. Rename the group to Buck, and make sure this group is on top of everything else. So now we need to scale this up. Please excuse the quality of this image as it's going to become a little pixelated. So select the Buck group and set the scale to 400%. And then set the rotation to 90. Then move it into position so the head is centered, which would be -100x and -1170y. We're going to have to animate this with keyframes, mostly because we need to move him as we spin and shrink him, and it's not one continuous motion. At the end of the day, it's just easier with keyframes than trying to use behaviors. So mark a keyframe at the beginning for the position, the rotation, and the scale. Then move the playhead to 22 seconds and 15 frames, and add another keyframe for all three parameters. And since we're here, type the O key to mark the out point of the Buck group. And at this point, we need to move Buck so he's centered. So set X and Y to 0, and then shrink him down to 5%, and set the rotation to -415. So now we have to do some additional keyframing because he's rotating from the center, so his head's going to go off screen. So at the 2 second and 20 frame position, add another keyframe for position only, and change the X to -80 and Y to -250. That should keep him on screen. Then, so that the movement remains smooth, we need to make the interpolation for these keyframes continuous. So down at the bottom, click on this animated dropdown and change it to position. And that will show us only the position-specific keyframes. Then, with only position showing, drag and select all three keyframes, and then right-click on one of them and select interpolation, and then choose continuous. This will make the movement smoother throughout the animation. At the 9-second mark, let's add another keyframe to position and change the value of X and Y to 0. That's going to center the Buck character in the middle of the screen long before the animation is finished. Okay, so now we need to make a minor change to the scale. At the 6-second mark, let's add a keyframe to scale only and change it to 115. Now we're going to go down to the animation dropdown and change it to show scale, then click and drag to select the keyframe that we just made, right-click and change the interpolation to continuous. Now select the whole group and add a fade in, fade out behavior. Set both fade in and fade out to 40. He's slightly transparent in the original, so select the BuckRogers guy layer, not the group, and change his opacity to 85%. We can't change the group opacity because we've already added a fade in, fade out behavior to that group. All right, so let's play this back and see how it looks. You know, if only I could play the music along with this, it would be so much more impressive. All right, so this looks pretty good. Let's save this as another generator template. Go to the File menu and select Publish Template. Then select the option to publish as a Final Cut generator. Change the category to BuckRogers and name this Ring Sequence. Okay, we're almost done. So next we need to create a circle template to show the actors. Here's the original sequence. So it's basically a ring mask on the gold effect and another circle mask playing the video. We're going to make this as its own template. It's about 24 seconds long. Leave the ring sequence open because we're going to need it in a moment. So in Motion, create a new HD project that is 24 seconds long. Then drag in the credits.psd file, and once again, hold the mouse button down and select Import All Layers when the menu appears. Drag the credits group to the root level and then delete the empty group. And you can see that there's 4 layers here. The drop zone, a circle mask for the drop zone, another circle mask for the gold ring effect, and then a black circle background. That background is needed because without it, the gold ring effect will appear transparent when this template is placed on top of a video. So first, right-click on the drop zone layer and select Add Image Mask. Make sure you're in the inspector, then drag the drop zone mask layer onto the mask source. Now go back to the ring sequence project. I'll just use the window menu and go all the way to the bottom. I'll select Ring Sequence. Then I'll select the gold ring effect group and copy it by pressing Command-C or right-click and select Copy. Return to the new project. Under the window menu, select Untitled. When you're back in the new project, press Command-V to paste the group into the project or right-click and select Paste. Drag and position the group so it's just above the background layer. Now right-click on it and select Add Image Mask. Then drag the gold mask layer onto the mask source. Now we just need to change the drop zone image type to drop zone and then publish the pan and scale parameters. That's pretty much it. I'll just play it back for a moment so you can see the gold effect appearing within the outer ring. Okay, so let's publish this. Go to File and select Publish Template. Select the option to publish as a Final Cut generator. Change the category to BuckRogers. And let's name this Credits. Oh man, whew, that was a lot of work. I hope you're still with me because the results are going to be pretty cool. So let's switch over to Final Cut Pro and assemble the whole sequence together. Back in Final Cut Pro, let's start by applying the video clips to the drop zones in slides 2, 3, and 4. With slide 2 selected in the timeline, drag slide 2-drop zone 1 into the drop zone 1 source. Then do the same for drop zone 2, and then of course drop zone 3. I'm going to adjust the pan value of drop zone 1, dragging X to the left until that rocket is centered. Then in drop zone 2, I'm first going to set the scale to 50% and then drag the X and Y values until the rocket is nicely positioned. For drop zone 3, I'm going to adjust the scale to 70% and then adjust X and Y until the video is centered. I'm just going to quickly adjust the duration of slide 2 to 7 seconds and 23 frames. So with slide 2 selected in the timeline, press Ctrl-D and type 723, then press Return. Now select slide 3 and do the same thing. Drag over slide 3-drop zone 1 into the drop zone 1 source, and repeat for drop zone 2 and drop zone 3. Adjust the scale for drop zone 1 to 130%, and do the same for drop zone 2 Set the scale to 130% and adjust the Y position to around 8.5. And the same again for drop zone 3, setting the scale at 130% and adjust X to around -2.0 and Y to about 4.0. Now set the duration of slide 3 to 3 seconds and 8 frames. Press Ctrl D and type 308 and then return. Now on to slide 4. Drag in the corresponding videos for each drop zone 1, 2, and 3. Adjust the drop zone 1 scale to 130% and set the X value to about 7.0. Adjust the drop zone 2 scale to about 130% and then adjust the drop zone 3 scale to 125%. The duration can be left at the default 5 seconds. Alright, so now we're ready to bring in the ring sequence. So click on the titles and generators icon and drag the ring sequence onto the timeline. Position it above the main storyline because we need to fade this in while overlapping slide 4. I'm just going to snap it to position so it starts when slide 4 ends. Then with it selected, I'll type in -20 to move it back 20 frames. Now to fade it in, we're going to select the start of the ring sequence in the timeline so you only see the highlight on the left edge. Then press Command T to add the cross dissolve transition. Now select the transition that just got created and type Ctrl D to change the duration. Type 20 and press return to make it only 20 frames long. I would like to do the same thing for slide 4 fading out, and I'll try it, but check this out. I select the edge, type Command T, and look what happens. It tries to dissolve the clip into the adjacent slug, and it won't even let me move it. So it's a bit frustrating, so I'm just going to do this with keyframing the opacity. I'll undo that dissolve by pressing Command Z. I'm going to select slide 4 and move the playhead to the start of the ring sequence. I'll go to the video inspector and set a keyframe for the opacity. Then, moving the playhead to the end of slide 4, I'll add another keyframe to opacity and change the value to 0. I'll just play this segment back to make sure it looks correct. Yep, that's exactly what we want. Now let's take a look at the ring sequence template. On the right, you can see all the drop zones 1 through 8. Just a note that adding videos to drop zones which don't appear until later in the template can be a bit tricky because the video starts playing from the beginning of the template, so you have to account for that. I have a detailed video covering how this works, and I also have a link to this video in the description. In the sample videos I provided, that's already been accounted for. So going back to the library, I'll drag the rings-drop zone 1 video to drop zone 1. Then repeat that all the way up to drop zone 8. Now all we have to do is add the credits. The timing of this should be at 45 seconds and 9 frames. That should be the cut point between these two scenes. Move the playhead here. Now go back to the Generators tab, drag in the credits template and position it at the playhead. With the credits template selected in the timeline, drag on the credits video into the drop zone. Set the scale to 112%. We need to fade out the credits at the end, so select the right edge of the credits clip and press Command T. We need to set the duration of this transition to 20 frames, so press Ctrl D and type in 20 and then return. And finally, add a cross dissolve to the end of the ring sequence, so select the very right edge, press Command T, then select the transition, press Ctrl D and type 10 to set the duration to 10 frames. There's only a couple of things left to do. One is the year that counts up from 1987 to 2491. And the other thing is the actual credits, the name of the show, the name of the actors. So let's do that now. First, you have to have one of those retro computer fonts to show the year. I've supplied a font that I could find with a really unusual name. It's called automission.ttf. So go ahead and install that now. Simply double-click on the automission.ttf file and choose Install when the font window appears. Once you install it, you can close that window. Note that at this point you should probably quit and restart Motion. Sometimes it doesn't recognize when new fonts have been installed, so just to be safe, quit and restart the application. Once you've restarted it, go ahead and create a new project that's 44 seconds long. Now, in order to create the counter, we're going to use a built-in generator in Motion. So go to the Library tab and select Generators. Then click on Text Generators and drag the Numbers generator onto the Layers panel inside of the default group. Rename the group to Year Counter and rename the Numbers generator to Year. So with the year selected, go to the Inspector tab, then make sure the Text Generator tab is selected and that you're in Generator. So this Numbers generator is used to display automatic counters in Motion. They can count up or count down or display random numbers. Obviously, we want this one to count up. So let's change the start value to 1987 and the end value to 2491. We also want to uncheck the thousands separator. Okay, so now let's set the font and the font size. So switch over to the Format tab and change the font to Auto Mission. Then set the size to 120. We're going to leave the alignment to left justified. If we made it centered, the text may jump around a bit in an effort to stay centered as the numbers change. Then move the year simply by dragging it until that center alignment guide appears. That way you know it's centered on the screen, and then slide it down to about here. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can always be moved once we're in Final Cut Pro. Now, we need to know how long it should take to count from 1987 to 2491. I already figured that out, and it should be 22 seconds and 9 frames. The quickest way to set the duration is move the playhead to 2209 and then press the O key to mark the out point. Okay, so now we have a minor issue. The starting year of 1987 needs to be on screen for a bit before it starts to count up. Unfortunately, the numbers generator does not allow for this. We could create a text object and then match the size and position, but an easier way is to simply duplicate the numbers generator and make the start and end values both 1987. So select the year layer or generator in the Layers tab and right-click and choose Duplicate. And rename this to Year Start. Go over to the Generator tab and change the end value to 1987. The length of time that the year shows 1987 is 19 seconds and 15 frames. So move the playhead to 1915 and with the year start selected, press the O key to mark the out point. Then select the original year layer in the timeline and drag it over so it begins right after the year start is finished. I'm going to play a little bit of this back to make sure it's working correctly. Okay, it looks good. We also need a static year at the end when the counter reaches 2491. It needs to remain on screen as 2491 for a few seconds. So duplicate the year layer by selecting it, right-clicking and choosing Duplicate. Change the name to Year End. This is only on screen for 2 seconds, so move the playhead to 200 and with the year end selected, type the O key to once again mark an out point. Then select it in the timeline and drag it over to the right so it starts after the year layer. Then go to the generator settings and change the start and end values to 2491. I'm going to play this segment back. All right, looks perfect. One last thing we need to do is to add a drop shadow. It needs to be black, but in order for us to see what we're doing, we need to change the background color of the project. So type in Command J to bring up the project properties, then click on background color. I'm just going to click on the color palettes icon and choose cyan. Note that the background is still transparent, so when this is published, we don't need to worry about resetting the background color to black. Then select the year counter group, and over on the left under Properties, click on the Drop Shadow option. Then click on Show so we can see the properties. Leave the color as black. Set the opacity to 100. The blur is good at 5.0. Change the distance to 10. And the angle is good at 315. All right, so that's it. Let's save this as another template. Go to File, then select Publish Template. Again, choose the option to publish as Final Cut Generator. Select BuckRogers as the category, and name this to Year Counter, and select Publish. Then go back to Final Cut Pro, and go to Titles and Generators. In the BuckRogers group, drag the year counter to the beginning of the timeline. I think I might have positioned that a little bit too high on the screen. So go over to the video inspector and drag the Y position for the year counter down to roughly about here. Now let's play this back and see what we ended up with. The slides are looking pretty good. The year counter is working. The rings look awesome. And the credits look good. Okay, so something happened here at the ending. I think I messed up the timing a little bit. We can just make a few changes to fix it. First, go ahead and delete the dissolve transitions and extend the ring sequence to the very end. With the right edge selected, press Command T to make a new transition. Select the transition, press Control D and type in 10 to set the duration to 10 frames. Then drag the right edge of the credits clip to about here. With the edge selected, press Command T to add the transition, and again change the duration to 10 frames. I'll just play this back real quick. That looks much better. The very last thing we need to do is add the credits text. So like the name of the show and the actors' names. And I supplied each one as a PNG file so it can easily be placed onto your timeline. So there's a folder called credits in the files that I sent you. Drag that onto your Final Cut Pro project. Then drag the credits BuckRogers A image onto your timeline. This needs to be about 10 frames after the year changes to 2491. So for me, it's at 42 seconds and 10 frames. And right away, there's a minor issue. The 2491 needs to be below the BuckRogers text. So when we lowered the position earlier, it wasn't quite enough. Pretty easy fix though. I'm just going to select the year counter and then go to the video inspector and drag the Y value so the 2491 is positioned right about here. Then move the playhead to 44 seconds and 15 frames and drag the credits BuckRogers B image to the timeline. This should be about 15 frames after the end of the year counter. So this title needs to stay on screen until just after that credit circle appears. This should be at 46 seconds. And adjust the length of the BuckRogers A and B clips so they end at the playhead. Then click on the right edge of the BuckRogers A clip, press Command T to create a dissolve transition, then select it, press Control D, and change the duration to 5 frames. Now copy this transition by pressing Command C and select the right edge of the BuckRogers B clip and paste in the transition using Command V. Now move the playhead to 49 seconds and 12 frames. This is just a few frames after it cuts to Gil Gerard with this reddish background behind him. And then adjust the length of this clip and end it to just before it fades to Aaron Gray. That's at 53 seconds and 3 frames for me. Now to quickly add the fades. I'll just copy the transition we already made and paste it at the beginning and at the end of the Gil Gerard clip. Then move the playhead to just after this clip of Aaron Gray appears. It should be at 57 seconds and 9 frames. Drag the Aaron Gray image to the timeline and position it at the playhead. Now adjust the length of this clip so it ends just before it fades to Tim O'Connor. That should be at 1 minute, 0 seconds, and 11 frames. Then once again paste in the transitions at the beginning and the end. And lastly, move the playhead and you can see Tim O'Connor's face right after he opens the door. That should be at 1 minute, 2 seconds, and 18 frames. Drag in the Tim O'Connor image and snap it to the playhead position. And once again adjust the length so it ends just before it fades to Gil Gerard at 1 minute, 5 seconds, and 11 frames. Then paste in the transitions. Okay, let's just play this back to see how it looks. Looking pretty good. Very happy with that. And holy crap, we are done. If you want to see this with the music, I uploaded a separate video complete with the music track. There's a link for it in the description. Well, congratulations if you made it this far. I'd love to see your end product if you want to send me a link. This was a lot of work, not just for me, but for you guys too. It was a very complex project, and I hope you got a lot out of it and learned some new techniques at the same time. Thanks so much for watching. My name is John Martins. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode of Apple a Day.